7th of May, 2022. So thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. And make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to like my official YouTube videos for my official YouTube channel. And go to my website, www.susanmealing.com. So, I don't know how ignorant my ex-in-laws have to be. I also don't know how ignorant my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister would have to be. I know my son and my daughter, as far as their biological father, children who do seek certain things in comparison look for approval in a certain capacity. And the ways that they seek that approval is through the actual measures that actually gets the approval in comparison to other factors. So in those particular references, when you actually seek that, especially young in age, you do things that would actually get the attention of. Usually, if you care though, it's supposed to be in the positive ways that actually assists in certain references compared to, and that goes even into the elder ages. So when you're older and you seek approval from someone, whether it's an acquaintance or a friendship or family or whatever type of relationship, if you seek that approval, you have to do certain things that get that approval in certain references. And so there's a difference between good attention and bad attention. So if you do things to annoy someone on purpose because you throw a temper tantrum, because you get called out for something, or whatever it is, you're not going to ever get that good approval no matter what you do, because if you keep doing negative choices, you're only going to get that same response. So if you seek good attention, then you have to do things that actually get that response, okay? It's very common sense. So I dealt with an individual who took me off of a military installation. My ex-in-laws did not like, for example, my ex-sister-in-law, Mary Evangelina Nichols Osteen, was extremely upset that in my house in Carrollton, Texas, I wrote about this after discussing this, by the way, that she didn't like in my house in Carrollton, Texas, I didn't have a lot more images of her dead brother, which first and foremost, I didn't care because I wasn't seeking her approval. Secondly, in that particular reference, she didn't know what I dealt with, even though she did. She knew when I met her in 2001 that I had a head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. She knew because her husband was graduating basic training in the Air Force. She knew that I had a blue ID card because of the time frame of getting on post, as well as how it mysteriously, though not mysteriously, went missing. She knew that I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. She knew that I had been in a coma for a while. She knew these things as to, additionally, me being 18 years old when I met her, pregnant with my son at 18 years old with a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. She knew this. She knew what her now dead brother was as when he was alive. She knew that he had burnt offerings to curse her and her sister. She knew what type of child he was. She knew he hated her. She had sought his approval so much when he was an adult, which he didn't give her the attention she sought because she wasn't doing in some hypotheticals, anything that was actually beneficial. So she had whatever perception, whether or not she knew about the first separation in truth and or second and final separation in truth, that's on her. So I had discussed this with multiple people. Her sister, my other ex-sister-in-law, knew about the first separation, knew about the second and final separation, and additionally knew about the abuses that were occurring to the time frame. Anybody who actually understands military uniform and digital imaging, as well as how online stuff lasts for eternity, I don't know what lack of intelligence you have to have for someone such as that to not be capable to intellectually conceptualize the understanding how much her dead brother actually hated everybody when he was alive. So for example, he had hated me so much that he didn't care that my hair was going to be as it is. I was going to look as I was going to look. My son and my daughter, being my son and my daughter, in the picture of regarding the JCPenney pictures in the dress blues, where he knowingly stole valor without my son, my daughter, or I, including the other aspects of knowledge of. Not until Grandpa Nichols, which this is how much he hated Grandpa Nichols, to do this. So he hated his own father so much that he was willing to wear his earned rank, his earned ribbons, his earned medals from his time when he had been involved in the Army through the before and after time frame of the Vietnam War. That's what those dress blues pictures are. So he disrespected his own father to that level, not caring about the long term because he hated his father for actually earning valor so much. He also had whatever issues during their childhood, which my ex-sisters-in-law and my ex-brother-in-law would know what their childhood was. So my dead ex-husband, my children's biological father, hated his father so much that he was willing to do that. Now, I, on the other hand, have issues with how I dealt with certain things. There's a difference. I didn't ever go out of my way to ever disrespect my biological father or my biological mother or my biological sister, unlike how they have been in that hypothetical. However, here's the irony. My dead ex-husband hated them that much as well. So remember, the picture from JCPenney's with my son, my daughter, and I, and that whole thing in his dress blues, he hated his son so much, he didn't care about the long-term effect. He hated his daughter so much, he didn't care about that effect. He didn't care about that. Because if he did, he wouldn't have done that, especially knowing the aspects of email. Maybe not to the depth level that others would know. Maybe not to the depth level of the portrait studio regarding. Maybe not that I would know. Though he would know enough in regards to the common aspects of how many pictures I ordered because of the length of time for all of the portraits that I had arranged the schedule for. Similarly to arranging going to Fort Worth, my work. Similarly to arranging to go to Oklahoma, my work. Similarly to arranging to go to Georgia, my work. That's always been my work. So my dead ex-husband, my children's biological father, hated his father so much that he was willing to do that. He looked down on his brother so much because he didn't have a degree. I did discuss this as well as write about it in my first book, Finding a Silver Lining. All you have to do is go to my website, www.susanneeling.com, go to the book section, and it'll take you to the links through Amazon. There's also the Dropbox links regarding finding a silver lining and finding the silver lining that discusses this, but this is the facts. He hated that so much that it didn't matter. I dealt with conversations because of defending his brother for having a certification to be a plumber. I dealt with that, which there are the proofs of quite a few factors. His brother, his dead brother, hated him so much when he was alive, he didn't care. On military installations, it didn't matter. So he also knew that his brother had been in the army and whatever medals and ribbons he earned. His dead brother did not care how that was going to ever impact him in the long term. This is his own eldest brother that he didn't care about. So he obviously wouldn't care, as he didn't about my son or my daughter, which are his biological son and his biological daughter. He did not care so much about them or myself at all that he was willing to do that. Similarly, he did not care about his own father, obviously. He did not care about his older brother because of the proof in those references. He did not obviously care about his second wife or any of the children involved. So he did not care about his father. He didn't care about his oldest brother. So my dead ex-husband, my children's biological father that died, he did not care about his father. He did not care about the fact that I gave birth to my son and my daughter. So why would my ex-mother-in-law ever think that her son that died ever cared about her? Grandpa Nichols warned her about those dress blue pictures. So my dead ex-husband, my son's biological father, my daughter's biological father that died, hated his own mother so much that he knew that she would put the pictures up in her house the way as per her normal. He hated her so much that he knew that I was going to give the pictures as I had. He hated her. He didn't ever care about her, because if he actually cared about his own mother, he wouldn't have done that knowing that she went to Carswell Air Force Base. If he actually cared about his own mother and actually cared about his own father, he obviously wouldn't have worn those dress blues in the city of San Antonio. 5 military bases. Wouldn't have done that at all if he actually cared. So I don't know what level of understanding from that knowledge people have needed to have. I figured it was common sense. Though those types of individuals that I've dealt with certain situations needlessly because of, it's the facts. It's not my fault. I made attempts to explain things. When it got to the level of, not just with the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, but all the other factors as well, such as subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain and that coma aspect, along with my headaches and migraines and memory deficits and cognitive disorders, and having gone from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math. So my dead ex-husband, who had taken me off of a military installation, knowing that I should have been in medical hold unit, as he even confessed to me in the month of January 2008, flat out did. I made attempts in regards of Fort Sam Houston in 2008, but CID, their feelings, which again, knowing what I dealt with in medical hold unit before it became warrior transition unit, do not pretend that he ever cared about me. So all those people in regards to whatever infantry, whatever high school, whatever connection of, if he did not care about the mother biologically of his only 2 children, if he did not care about his own biological father who actually earned valor, if he did not care about his own biological mother who gave birth to him, why would you think he'd care about you? Because you had a connection at a second? Oh, that's cute. This is eternity. So he didn't care that his mother was going to have sympathy from her 2 daughters and their children. He didn't care that his mother, who was going to have sympathy from her eldest son and wife and children, he didn't care because he knew, because I warned him when I was informed, which was literally the weekend before the week he was found, he did not care. Remember, when he had informed me of the IRR claim, and I had asked about the aspects of, I already wrote about this after discussing this. I had the site and explained it. He did not care. This is how much he hated them. So, it's one of those, that's not my fault though. So, infantry, you don't have the right to hate me for what he did. Don't pretend that in the infantry or the cavalry or any MOS where there's males as the majority, don't pretend you don't know about some abusive males. Don't pretend that. You need to accept that reality. Sure, great, whatever in the field, that's nice. That doesn't change anything, and you know it. So he didn't care that his own biological mother at all was going to deal with this at all. Knew that there was going to be whatever of whatever in those capacities. Did not care. Didn't matter. Why would you think that if he doesn't care about those people, that it would ever matter regarding anything else? So if you ever wanted to try to impress in regards of if you believe in that spirit aspect, why would you think he would care about you? At all. In any capacity. In any way, in any shape, in any form. What would make you think that you could ever impress him? If that's the thing in regards of what occurred during my Medal of Honor art project trips. Why would you ever be that ignorant? I don't know. In this lecture, you can answer that for yourself. So then, he was as he was. So his 2 sisters both had 2 daughters by the time he died. He knew that those 2 sets of teenage-aged children were going to utilize online social media, which I warned about. He didn't care about that. So those 2 of each of his 2 sisters, he didn't care about. So if their wish was that they would ever do something, that he would ever care about them, I don't know what level of ignorance they would have to be at when you really think about it. He got angry at me because I actually care about life. He didn't care about them at all. So remember, he didn't care that he walked around San Antonio in those dress blues. What he cared about is that I wouldn't defend him for stealing valor, because he got accused of it during Halloween in 2007, which I didn't know what that meant regarding which ribbon or apparently the majority of. And I flat out defended whoever had yelled at him, because obviously I didn't graduate basic training, so that would translate to somebody would, but that wouldn't be me. And if they knew those ribbons in comparison to me, I'm going to stand on the side of the individuals who actually have the understanding from the knowledge in comparison to me. I only know what 2 ribbons look as. The first ribbon that I know is the rainbow ribbon where you graduate basic training. The only other ribbon that I know what it looks as is the Medal of Honor ribbon. I have no idea what any of the other ribbons look as. To me, they look like a fruit salad. That's all I know what they look as. I have no idea of anything else. And so I know that they look good, but I don't know what they stand for unless I'm informed of. So I wasn't there when he got yelled at in the Halloween trick-or-treating time in 2007. Emily, who a neighbor at the time married to Arnold, was there, along with her 2 daughters. So those individuals who were there where I was taking care of my son and my daughter, they know whoever it was in whatever part of the neighborhood during trick-or-treating that had yelled at him. But he didn't care about them either, because obviously walking around during Halloween in those references. So think about how on Halloween you kind of dress a certain way and it's more honest. So that year I was little Bo Peep and I made the joke, well, I can, shepherd around some, what have you. And so that was my joke. I could, because that is as it is. To guide sheep along the correct path. In whatever outfit I felt as wearing. And so he had chosen on Halloween to wear stolen valor. Think about that. So then you have these other factors where his one sister, my ex-sister-in-law, Susie Marie Nichols Lopez at the time, her eldest daughter, Brianna, would remember what happened when she had flushed a few necklaces of his when he was in high school. Don't pretend he cared about life. Brianna would be capable to understand how much I had to protect my son and my daughter. So would her mother, my ex-sister-in-law, Susie Marie Nichols Lopez. And if my ex-mother-in-law was in the house as well, then they all would know what I had to do as best as I could to keep my son and my daughter and myself safe as far as their dead relative. They have, I'm going to guesstimate, held on way too long of ever thinking that he actually cared about them. Most importantly, about their best interests. He didn't. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. These are the facts. So then you have the additional factor of Susie Marie Nichols Lopez's middle daughter, Marissa. No different in that capacity at all. There wasn't anything that was ever going to be of any care or concern from her dead uncle at all, whatsoever. Same thing in reference to their younger brother at the time, Joseph Anthony Nichols Lopez. No care, no concern, didn't matter. Because of those Dress Blues pictures. Would not matter whatsoever. Don't pretend that he actually cared. Knowing how his mom, his sisters, and brother, and in-law whatevers, don't pretend, as far as those who have seen that house, those who have seen the photo albums, do not pretend that he didn't actually know what was going to happen. He hated them to that level. Okay? So then you have his other sister, who he knew her husband was in the Air Force. Anybody who knows the situations between the Army and the Air Force, it's common sense. So he hated David Osteen so much, just as equally as he, to a degree, as he hated his elder brother, Tony Walker Nichols, hated that the fact, and he was active duty at the time, of wearing those dress blues in the picture when David was active duty. Just pointing that out there. Don't pretend that they were friends. He hated David Osteen. He hated his other sister, Mary Evangelina Nichols Osteen. As much as she might wish to remember otherwise, is she going to pretend that she doesn't remember him lighting stuff on in the bathroom on fire and literally cursing their names, meaning Mary and Susie? Because if they want to pretend that, they need to come to accept that. So then there's the two daughters, Sandra Marie Osteen and Ariel Nicole Osteen. They have had the most delusional viewpoint of all, to ever think that their dead uncle ever cared about them. Remember, they were in San Antonio at Lackland Air Force Base for David's graduation. He ran around the city of San Antonio in the dress blues with stolen valor. He knew how certain things were because of how Brianna was in reference to computer aspects. Same thing with my biological sister, which I'll get to that. Because don't pretend he actually ever cared. He full-fledged hated every aspect of. He paraded her around, but I'll get to that in a minute. So he hated his two other nieces. They lived in Georgia, near or in Macon, Georgia. The state is the home of the infantry basic training. Don't pretend he didn't hate the Army or the infantry or the Air Force or the Marines or the Navy or the Coasties at all when it comes to those dress blue stolen valor. He hated them to that level. I defended, he hated. I dealt with what I dealt with, he hated them. Don't pretend in those references. I am infuriated as to what I have dealt with, but he hated them. Wasn't ever going, you can't look at the dress blue pictures and ever actually truthfully think that he cared about them or anybody else whatsoever. Absolutely hated them. You can take a look at the sunglasses he wore as hiding his hatred, despite all those other factors. Because all you have to do is look at prior pictures from JCPenney's to see those were when he was in a supposed mood. He knew, don't pretend otherwise. So then you have my biological mother, who he hated. Absolutely hated. How, remember, he had treated females who earned a PhD the way he did. I stood up against that. I took a stand against that problem. I dealt with that. He hated Anna. There wasn't anything about Anna that he ever cared about. She would sing, and in comparison where I have headaches and migraines, and that's painful to me, and yeah, certain songs just aren't for a soprano voice, he hated her. Absolutely hated her. Made fun of the fact that she thought that she could actually do something in Texas. Hated the fact that her, Mike, and Patricia moved to Texas because he couldn't get away with certain things at that time. Hated them for that. Because up to that point in time, I was already dealing with what I was dealing with. But he utilized that because he hated the entirety of that much. He was that much of a skeptic as to any aspect of. He found out that Anna was a deacon of Old Tennant Presbyterian Church. He found out Mike was a trustee of Old Tennant Presbyterian Church. Because I was talking on Fort Sam Houston in Medical Hold Unit about that. He hated them. Look at his stone, it has the atheist symbol. And only at his time in January of 2008 did he begin to actually accept the facts that he purposefully messed with religious people on purpose. He didn't care. I've written about, after discussing 2 Corinthians, he was just that type of individual. He didn't care. He didn't care about 9 Lives books. First and foremost, he didn't volunteer there. Secondly, let's be honest on those factors as far as the hippie stuff. A cat sanctuary that was doing stuff to actually assist, he hated them. 100% hated them. He didn't respect any of those females. Again, no different in reference to. So while Suzanne Farnsworth has this romanticized view that of whatever, he hated her. Again, Anna had earned a master's degree from Rutgers University. Suzanne just had a male who paid for her to have a business. And she didn't actually do any real work in comparison to the majority of the other employees and volunteers. He hated her. He hated the fact that I was actually assisting. He hated the pagan community. He hated everything. There wasn't ever any point of anything that he ever cared about at all. So then there's my biological father. He hated Mike. There wasn't anything about Mike that he liked. First and foremost, the physical differences, those certain aspects of. He hated the fact that I would make coffee and cook food and take Mike, with me when I went certain locations. He hated that. So during the time frame of the first separation, they would know what he did as far as that's concerned. Same thing as far as the Jade Wolf Coven, which Christine or Christy would know as far as certain things are concerned. He hated them. So then there's Patricia. And I don't know what level of ignorance at that point, because he paraded her around, propped her up, was ready to just kick that pedestal out because he hated her. There wasn't any value to her at all. He was willing to corrupt her just so he could do so. Not because of anything worthwhile. He wanted to watch her fail in reference to education. Again, there are females in these references. When he was working at CTRC, as well as UTS, CHSA, whatever the wording letters are, he knows, as far as Eric Verona, he would know, in those regards, he would know what was said as far as Dr. Sun, both of them, as well as Dr. and Master Long and those others in the lab. He would know. Remember, when I was pregnant with my son and looking at baby names, I was told he didn't, by my now dead ex-husband, I was told he didn't understand why I didn't just take a bunch of pots and pans and throw them on the ground. When I asked why, he said, because I'm half Chinese. I didn't understand what that translated to. That didn't make sense to me. And then I dealt with what I dealt with. And then it was explained to me as to what that reference was. So don't pretend he ever cared. Again, you also have the situation referencing the bed after the Exorcist documentary and movie. That it didn't matter that he grabbed my ankle and I fell on my stomach. And that point in time, I didn't get taken to the emergency room. Don't pretend he ever cared about me. Don't pretend he ever cared about my son. Don't pretend he ever cared about my daughter, because there were plenty of times that I should have been taken to the emergency room and he just didn't care because he couldn't be bothered. Because only someone who would actually care in genuinity would push whatever else aside to actually take care of the health in the correct way. Do not pretend that he ever actually cared about my son, which is his biological son, my daughter, which is his biological daughter, or me at all, in any capacity. If you are actually ignorant enough to think that my dead ex-husband ever cared, well, that's your fault for being ignorant. Because there are so many signs to prove otherwise. So then, while my ex-in-laws, all of them could try to claim that they feel otherwise. No, what they feel or sense otherwise was my work, which my patterns of behavior prove that in comparison. So my dead ex-husband did not care at all about anyone in any capacity, in any way, in any shape, in any form. There was no one at UTSA he cared about. Don't pretend that you meant something to him. There was nobody at UTSCHSA that he cared about. Don't pretend that you meant something to him. There was not Mike, Anna, or Patricia that he cared. Don't pretend that he actually cared about you. You need to drop that illusion. Don't pretend, as far as my ex-in-laws, that he ever cared. At all. And that includes nieces and nephews. Don't pretend he did not care. At all. Anybody as far as different businesses he went to that he frequented, don't pretend he cared. Because if he did, he wouldn't have gone there in those dress blues. Don't pretend. At all. If he showed up to speak with you in those dress blues in the city of San Antonio and or anywhere else in the state of Texas, do not pretend he cared about you or your business, or you as an individual, or anything else. If you truthfully believe somehow that he did, I don't know why, because you must enjoy negative attention in comparison to positive attention. Because only someone who would prefer positive attention would ever look at that and see the reality. If you actually prefer negative attention, well, then think about why you would prefer negative attention. And then if you had him show up in those capacities, then think about that. So don't pretend that he cared about me. He didn't. Towards the end, he did. But by that time, it was in January of 2008. That was by the time. So then, in reference to my ex-in-laws, not just my ex-mother-in-law, my ex-father-in-law, my ex-brother-in-law and his whatever, my two ex-sisters-in-law and their whatevers, don't pretend that he ever actually cared about you. Ever again. Just accept it. Because if that has not been something that has been realized by this point in time, I don't know why you would ever think so. At all. Similarly, in a different capacity, not in a marital way, but anything in reference to my scuba diving, don't pretend those civilian recreational scuba divers cared about each other or anybody else. Because if they did, they wouldn't have wasted so much. Because all they had to do was ask me. Don't pretend otherwise. Ever. To this day, the 7th of May, 2022, because that has not been in the official capacity with me there, in person, face-to-face in person, do not pretend any of those civilian recreational scuba divers or any connected to military or law enforcement would ever actually care about safety. In truth, do not pretend that. Because if you wish that that actually is, why would you ever think so? What ignorant person would ever actually believe there was genuine concern and care about actual safety when it comes to scuba diving? I don't know what level of intellect you would be at. As many times as I have been made fun of as far as the after effects of my head injury, do not pretend any differently than in reference to my dead ex-husband. As far as that's concerned, it's no different. It is literally the exact same, male or female. And anybody, in any way, in any shape, in any form, that has assisted the length of time in comparison to actually bringing it forward immediately, back in the year of 2009, even to this day of 2022, each and every minute of each and every hour of each and every day of each and every week of each and every month of each and every year, and at this point a decade and over, this is how little you people prove to not care in any way. You don't have any care. You have no proof of actually caring about life. This is how little you actually care about scuba diving. This is how little you care about life. Because if you actually cared, there would not have ever been a hesitation, and there would not be any continued hesitation if you actually cared. But that would require it being done correctly. That would translate to you actually having to speak with me, not a lecture. Not at all. No. Not as far as a YouTube video situation. You would actually have to ask me. So there's the comment section as far as my official YouTube video link and my official YouTube channel and my website. Since that has not occurred to this day, to where I actually respond, because I haven't received any messages regarding that at all. So don't pretend that anybody that's been an intermediary that wasn't ever asked, by the way, do not pretend they care about anything at all. Because if they wish that they could say that in truth, you know for a fact they can't. At all. Don't matter. At all. That's the facts. So then take in consideration how it was known what was going to occur regarding CID. Don't pretend that he was some sort of whatever, especially after what was known I dealt with in medical hold unit. Don't pretend CID. Don't pretend Army either. At all. You know what I dealt with in the year of 2000 and afterwards, as far as medical hold unit. Do not pretend that you didn't know about those factors. Do not at all. It was known as far as 2 different individuals from the medical unit of permanent party, 1 permanent party, 1 student party. Do not pretend it was ever my fault at a 17-year-old with a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain after having been in a coma. Do not pretend that that rave situation was ever my fault. That's your fault as far as medical hold unit. That's your fault as far as CID. That's your fault as far as that building. And Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot companies in that battalion. Do not pretend, as I told Major General Gilman in his office in 2008, do not pretend changing the name from Medical Hold Unit to Warrior Transition Unit fixes or repairs anything that occurred. Because it still hasn't been fixed or repaired correctly. Nobody's actually asked me yet again when it comes to that. Nobody has. Not any legal individual, not any Congress or Senate or anything. White House included. Not a thing. Nobody's ever asked me as to what would be needed. So don't pretend that those aspects actually cared, because if they did, by this point in time, there would be a different situation now, wouldn't there? Don't pretend, as the colonel did, despite certain factors, which I told him to stop in that 2-star general's office. Told him to his face, despite having had 3 firearms in my face. Out of respect, do not lie to me. Do not pretend that he was a worthwhile soldier. Do not do that at all, whatsoever. Did not matter at all, less than 5 minutes beforehand. Those 3. Do not pretend. As I had given that falsely awarded Bronze Star back. Do not pretend. This is the problem when it comes to those types of situations. So while the Army, in whichever capacity of wishful thinking that just because he graduated basic training in AIT, the Chief Warrant Officer Tree would know that. So do not pretend that he actually cared about my son, which is his biological son, my daughter, which is his biological daughter, myself, mother of my son and my daughter, obviously, or his biological father, his biological mother, his biological brother, his biological sisters, and all extensions thereof outward. Do not pretend he cared about them when it comes to that JCPenney picture as far as the stolen valor dress blues. Do not pretend. Because with those small factors, do not pretend that anybody that he knew, whether friend or even my own biological, don't pretend he cared about you. Don't pretend that. You do yourself a disservice. Just go through those stages of grief and accept the facts. That is the reality. If he cared, that wouldn't have occurred. What I dealt with personally, wouldn't have occurred. My ex-sisters-in-law, my ex-brother-in-law, but most importantly in this reference, both of my ex-sisters-in-law and their daughters would know for a fact what I dealt with keeping my son and my daughter safe. My ex-sisters-in-law themselves would know for a fact, not just because of seeing, so my ex-sisters-in-law's daughters from their own experiences would know in reference to my son and my daughter, those 2 females would know from their own experiences what I dealt with when it came to doing what I could to keep my son, my daughter, and myself safe. So my ex-brother-in-law may or may not know. His second wife, whatever as far as that's concerned, may or may not know. Don't pretend you don't know how Grandpa Nichols was when he was younger. Don't pretend you don't know about certain things as far as other things. So other people who may have thought that they had, especially some of these females, just because you think that it was whatever it was regarding his dick getting wet, you didn't produce life. You weren't anything to him. You weren't of any importance ever. Again, his own mother, his own father, his own brother, his own sisters, his nieces, his nephews, his cousins, all that sort of stuff. 2 children. Did not matter. Do not pretend you're important to that. I wouldn't know what level of lack of intellect you would have to ever think otherwise. At all. But that does go in reference to individuals who ever doubted the after effects from my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. Because I did what I could. It's not my fault that the drill sergeant threw me into the metal part of the bunk. It's not my fault that Fort Sam Houston, as far as Brooke Army Medical Center at that time, did not do certain things. Not my fault that they didn't do the meal situation. Not my fault in regards of the medical students and permanent party regarding that. That Article 15 I shouldn't have ever gotten at all. That's the fact that medical hold unit did not do certain things. So don't pretend that's my fault. Additionally, with the fact that I got counseling statements because of getting lost on the military installation walking around, I did not have a car at the time. So there was no way for me to actually get to Austin on my own, which lets you know, as far as CID, as well as medical hold unit, or now warrior transition unit, don't pretend in those references. I didn't know anybody in the commonality aspect of. I didn't even know that I was going to be put in medical hold unit until I arrived back in San Antonio. So don't pretend CID, MPs, Fort Sam Houston, JAG, or even Pentagon, don't pretend that I, as a 17-year-old who literally fought in Major Grimes's office about going back to basic training. I actually fought with a major as an E1. Tried to convince her that my headaches and migraines, whatever, so what? So what, there's blood on my brain. So what? I could still go to basic training. I finished the courses, I did this and that, and I could go back to I fought with a major. I fought with the neurologist major that I could go back to basic training. Okay, fine, the physical aspects, I'll acknowledge it. Other situations, though, that's different. Because in the civilian sector, in comparison to military and law enforcement and fire department and EMS, in the civilian sector, you do not have that leniency to be that strict. Anybody in the civilian sector that would wish otherwise, that's actually a failure on your part. That shows your issues. Because anybody that would ever have any problem regarding the after effects of my head injury shows your lack of capabilities as a human being. Because I'm honest about my background. That would actually show the lack of honesty regarding everybody else in those references of what is supposed to be considered as the adult consenting lifestyle, whether as BDSM or swinger. Just for that clarification. If that's not liked, it really doesn't matter. That's the facts. If you make amendments or certain what have yous for individuals that have physical handicaps, there is no excuse for you to ever have an issue, especially when I'm just as honest in wording as they are on site, depending on. That literally lets you know whether you are an actual feminist or anything but. In that hypothetical, that also lets you know whether or not you're an open-minded community or not. One or the other. You can't have it both ways. You cannot go and actually truthfully believe in reference to what is supposed to be the consenting adult lifestyle community. You cannot actually be open-minded enough if you are going to claim that woke situation for someone who you can physically see because of whatever disability, in comparison to me being honest. So let's say because of the after time frame of the attacks on 11 September 2001, let's say that there's an amputee, whatever aspect of a hand, an arm, whatever, a leg or a part of whatever. If you make capabilities for them and you don't have a problem with that,
But you have a personal issue because of the tattoos I have, and my hair because of my headaches and migraines, memory deficits, and cognitive disorders. Do not pretend that you are as open of a community as you would claim to be, because you're not. If there has been any issues in regards of any what is supposed to be considered adult consenting lifestyle community, because if it has been a complaint because I did not feel comfortable or have any sensation of comfort to actually allow myself to get involved in that capacity because of myself knowing myself, that shows you what closed-mindedness you actually are. Because if you would actually discourage open and honest discussions about any capacity of, that literally shows you being closed-minded. Because if you're not willing to have actual discussions with, as far as that lets you know in each and every way. If you have ever involved yourself, as far as what's supposed to be the consenting adult lifestyle community, within any aspect of any portion of any relationship of mine, whether my biological son, which you shouldn't have done, obviously, or my biological daughter, which you shouldn't have done, obviously, because I've done what I could to keep my son and my daughter out of that. Yeah, I've had whatever, but I didn't ever bring that up to them when they were minors. Keep that in mind. So anybody that would bring that up to my son and or my daughter when they were minors, when I did not and would not, do not pretend that you are anything other than contributing to a delinquency of a minor at that point. At the starting point, to be specific. Then, in the capacity of, if you are willing to discuss that with my son and my daughter, and it's not in a school setting, where it's an actual education class, where it's only discussion in comparison to anything physical, because there is the difference. Not a demo, just a class, like a lecture, just like this. Anything else, you officially contributing to delinquency of a minor, especially without my permission. Because in New Jersey, you had to have paperwork signed off to have a class like that. That was mandatory to have paperwork filled out. So, especially any of you who voted Democrat, any of you that voted for 44, you didn't fill out any paperwork regarding me. So, there's those factors. So then, anybody as far as having those issues with me preferring to make sure that I understood, but you'd have to be genuinely honest when speaking with me. So if there were any complaints, whether in San Antonio, DFW, or Austin, or San Marcos, because I have certain minimum requirements, so that way there's the understanding as much as possible in genuine truth. Do not pretend that you are open-minded. If you had an issue with my creation of the different Munch Brunch as well as Whips group because of open, genuine discussion in truth, because it wasn't just one or two topic points I was going to go over. Don't let my official YouTube channel, as far as my official YouTube videos, fool you. I haven't touched on any of the discussions when it came to my lunch Munch Brunch. So, because I haven't touched on any of those discussions, that translates to, since Whips didn't get to go the way I was going to start it, don't pretend you'd ever have any idea of where that would begin. Because you're not me. So you wouldn't have the slightest inclination of. And so if you have a problem with a dominant leather female involving in that regard, being open-minded to discuss in truth, don't pretend that what's supposed to be the consenting adult lifestyle community is as open in that capacity regarding community aspects. in an inclusive way, in honesty. At all. Because if there were those as to how my son and I wound up in Washington State after everything that went on regarding my son, my daughter, and I, do not pretend that those people, in whatever capacity of, are actually worth such aspects. Because I would guesstimate their closets would have far more to tell in so many more ways. So again, just as similarly, if any had done so, then if regarding me, what would make you think you're special? Realistically, what would make you think that you're any different? And if you were a part of that, can you say in truth, one way or another, whether I'm accurate or whether there's the actual truth of? So, facts. And again, in reference to my Medal of Honor art project trips, if you thought that that would ever impress those particular factors of my dead ex-husband, he's been gone since the day of. Don't know what's wrong with you. Don't know what lack of intelligence you would have to have for that. Though I wouldn't be surprised if you read one situation in regards of and then automatically assumed the staying around in comparison to ever having paid attention to the prior details as well as thereafter as to those situations. Such wishful thoughts to ever think that that would mean something in those hypotheticals. So if you hated in the way of that badly, do you think he'd actually care? Because if you would, why? He confessed to me and had wished that I could look at things differently. Instead. So the only sympathy I've had is for my son and my daughter, where I kept my promises to ensure that once they were at a certain age, only then would I begin to discuss certain things. Because whether in writing or actual discussions, because of my rights. So in regards of, yeah, I know in reference to the Army and medical hold unit and basic training, there are those aspects of, however, my son and my daughter, as far as that's concerned, could have just asked me instead. In regards of my scuba diving, if that had to do with any issues because of temper tantrums, that my son and my daughter being more important when all you had to do was ask me, and that would have been it. All you had to do was ask me. Don't pretend that I ever actually meant to that level of to you, and or that scuba diving safety actually was that important to you. Because if it actually was, you would have asked me. In genuine truth, if it wasn't any other ulterior motive. Because that's the other factor. If you had an ulterior motive, well, how much did you actually care about scuba diving to begin with then? So then there's the other factors in regards of other situations. You could have asked me. Don't pretend anything else ever again. And accept the fact you legally had no right or authority to do so, no matter how much you wish. And in regards of anybody that asked everybody except me, why would you waste your time asking everybody else except the one and only who had done the scuba diving that I had. At what level of lack of common sense would that be? Regarding everybody else. So like, for example, if my son and or my daughter were asked about my scuba diving, why would you think that I would discuss that with them? If you spoke with my ex-in-laws about my scuba diving, what would they have to what experience when they were on land, how many hours away? If you asked my biological mother and or biological father and or biological sister, similarly the same, however many hours away, if you asked people that I knew in person, face-to-face in person, regarding other scuba divers, do they have the black shield around their scuba mask? Because if so, or the tinted one, why would you ever think that they could see me as to my work? It would be common sense. So, similarly, don't pretend you didn't half-ass at that point. Because there's only one person to have asked about my scuba diving to this day. So I can give a lecture, but there's all those other factors. So how much similar, what was that modern day book situation regarding my website, www.susanmealing.com? Let me know when I'm supposed to believe in humanity. Whether in reference to scuba divers, whether in reference to supposed to be consenting adult lifestylers, whether in reference to the pagan community, whether in reference to the other factors of different religions and those capacities of individuals that I've known, such as Old Testament Presbyterian Church and those aspects. Let me know when I'm supposed to believe in humanity regarding those factors in every other connected situation. Because then there's the aspects of Crystal Lake South High School and that 10-year reunion. Let me know when I'm supposed to actually believe that they aren't selfish to ever think that I would ever need to be there after what they obviously haven't remembered as to what I needlessly dealt with when I was up in that state. Because again, that's another rose-colored glasses sort of situation I'm gonna guesstimate as a hypothetical. And while yes, there were some good times, I had not wanted to move there. I made that abundantly clear. I had not wanted to attend high school there. I made that abundantly clear. I informed them that I was not going to go to the high school graduation. I made that abundantly clear. And so if those types of individuals thought that meddling in my life would ever get my opinion to be better of those areas instead, so it's going on how many years now? Okay, you should accept that. As far as whatever, whoever, throughout wherever in the state of Illinois or whatever connected up, in whichever capacity. And especially if you had an easier childhood and or easier teenage years and or easier biological adult years than I dealt with, let me know when I'm supposed to believe in humanity. Let me know. Let me know. I don't know where that would be. I mean, I could see it in some ways to some degrees, but it's kind of got to outweigh other aspects. And so at this current point in time, what would be the outweighing portion as to my personal life experiences in the combined aspect? In this lecture, think about whether I personally would review that I had which level, more or less positive experiences that I would view as positive experiences. If your guess is that I would have had more positive, no, let me clarify that. I made the best of what I could, as best as I could. However, I have worked to be capable to actually have more positive experiences for myself by my own standards as to how I prefer them in comparison. And I'm very specific, so since I have arranged things in a certain capacity for myself, that is realistically what would actually assist me to be in a better mood in comparison. So if your guesstimate was that I've had more negative experiences than positive ones, you'd be so accurate. Because what reality as to what level up? Not by other people's standards of what they would view as positive experiences. What I would view as positive experiences. That's the important factor. Do not leave it up to your interpretations of what you would consider as positive experiences. It's what I would view as what I would believe are positive experiences. So I'll give you one small amount of time. I finally got a house that, that was mine. And I was turning it into a home after what had occurred regarding my first house. And all those other factors. And because of the garage situation, which I explained in person, face-to-face in person, as well as put in writing as to that garage needless problem, because I did everything I could to get rid of Cactus Jack, also known as Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., because do not pretend in regards of the situations in reference to the dress blues. Do not pretend and fool yourselves in that regard. You need to accept that reality. Yet again, those details. So if you assumed, better pay attention, because you'd have to look at my biological sister for that instead. And in comparison to that hypothetical. So then, I finally get a house that I can turn into a home for my son and my daughter and I. Then I got involved in scuba diving. So for less than a full 12-month cycle. Because you gotta remember Grandpa Nichols, as far as that factor. So while other people may have had their opinion of, did anybody ever think, ever, who Grandpa Nichols was to me? Or is this the 7th of May, 2022, the first time that may have ever been thought? So, by the time of December 2008, that was when I started looking at something to make attempts. And so by the time of February officially, in 2009, that was the first time that I had anything that I could have to enjoy or try to. Yet I was dealing with all the other factors of. So while other people have had whatever opinions they've had, didn't even last a full 12 months because of quite a few situations. So if anybody wonders why my writings are as they are, especially after the length of time and the situations of, well, I haven't had many aspects as to what I personally would enjoy. So some might think otherwise. If you really think about my modeling pictures, where am I smiling? Just take that in mind. Which modeling pictures do I have an actual smile? Or was it actually modeling at all? Because of being with my son and my daughter as a mom. Keep that in mind. So, thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Subscribe to my official YouTube channel and like and share my official YouTube channel link. If you're going to leave a comment, please do have etiquette and respect. Go to my website, www.susanmuling.com. So I've been doing what I could to actually work to get to a level of what I could enjoy. So now that 2018 and then 2019 and 2020 and 2021 have occurred. Now into 2022, doing what I can for myself for once, while having continued to work as best as I can. So there are different ways that if you have appreciated and or found any actual value to my work, then through my website, you have different aspects of what would be a direct to me as it's supposed to be, and only to me. So if there are other aspects, you have my to contact form that I'm supposed to get the messages to actually read and respond to. Because for my choice. In comparison to hypothetical aspects. One and only sponsor. So you have a good day. Remember, it's just a few weeks away to the 6th of June, 2022. However, today is the 7th of May, 2022.